kapuluan sa pakikipagtulungan ng aming mga kapatid na himpilan. 89.3 DWIZ Dagupan, 94.3 DWIZ Palawan, 936 DWIZ Mimaropa. Kasama rin ang mga piling himpilan ng RPN Nationwide.
Sinusuyod ng buong pwersa ng DWIC News at Public Affairs ang buong Kamaynilaan
upang mayatid ang mga latest na kaganapan.
Mga balitang dapat ninyong malaman.
Ito ang DWIC Balita.
Mas todong pagbabalita.
DWIC Balita.
Patuloy na binabantayan ng pag-asa ang isang bagyo na nasa labas ng Philippine Area of Responsibility o PAR. Huli itong namataan ng Weather Bureau sa layong 2,040 kilometro silangan ng Mindanao. Taglay nito ang lakas ng hangin aabot sa 150 kilometro bawat oras o malapit sa gitna at may pagbugsong aabot sa 180 kilometro bawat oras. Kumikilos ito sa direksyong Pakanluran, Hilagang Kanluran sa bilis na 20 kilometro bawat oras, pero ayon sa pag-asa, malit lamang ang tsansa na pumasok ito sa teritoryo ng Pilipinas. Samantala, patuloy pa rin nakaaapekto sa bansa ang hanging amihan, kaya't makakaranas pa rin ng malamig na simoy ng hangin ang mga nasa Luzon at Visayas. Para sa karagdagang impormasyon at mas marami pa mga balita, bisitahin ang aming website dwiz882am.com at sundan ang aming Twitter account at Facebook page dwiz882. Ako po si Krista Dejos.
Balitang kapaki-pakinabang sa mga mamamayan, inyong nalaman
Sa DWIC Balita, maging updated sa mga balita.
mas todong pagbabalita.
DWIC Balita.
Mga isyong legal ay pag-uusapan. Bibigyang daan mga karapatang dapat ipaglaban. Sasagutin ang katanungan ng mga taong naghahanap ng katarungan. Dito sa programang Laban para sa karapatan. Kasama si Atty. Lorna Kapunan. Laban para sa karapatan.
Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Nandito na naman po tayo sa programang Laban para sa Karapatan. Ngayong umaga, medyo mag-i-English muna tayo sapagkat ang guest po natin ay imported. Galing pa sa Geneva, no? And she understands Tagalog perfectly. Perfectly zero.
Perfectly zero, that's right.
Perfectly zero. Although ang tatay niya ay Swiss at ang nanay niya ay Greek. So, ang kanyang pangalan ay Katerina Kapos. She is the operational legal advisor ng International Committee ng Red Cross. Ayan. Ang show natin ngayon ay informational. Kasi pagod na kami. Pagod na akong nang-aaway ng tao. O pagod na akong inaaway ng mga tao sa mga views ko dito sa stasyon. So, neutral muna tayo. Ang pag-uusapan po natin ay international humanitarian law. Kung hindi natin alam yan, makinig kayo in 1 hour's time, maiintindihan nyo na ang difference between humanitarian law at saka human rights law. Iba po yun. Ating rin favorite dito ay ang head ng IHL, International Humanitarian Law Committee, sa ating Philippine Red Cross. Ito pong kasama ko sa committee. Ako po ay in charge ng IHL sa Philippine Red Cross at dahil dyan, nakakapasyal po tayo sa Geneva to represent the country and the Philippine Red Cross. So, would you like to say hello to our listeners and viewers?
Sure.
Can I call you Katerina?
Of course, please.
Katerina.
Sure, yes. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Can you please?
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's a real pleasure to be here. As you mentioned, I think you mentioned, my limited knowledge of Tagalog tells me you mentioned I'm the newly arrived head of the legal department here at the International Committee of the Red Cross.
Exactly 5 weeks?
Exactly 5
months?
weeks ago.
Exactly
yes,
5
yes.
weeks ago.
And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here on the show and to answer some questions and talk about my big passion, which is international humanitarian law.
Very good. And Manny?
Hi, good morning. It's nice to be back here in this program.
In the Philippines. Feeling foreigner ka, Manny.
Parang feeling ko foreigner. Hi, batiin ko lang yung nanay ko.
Yes. Oh, happy
magandang umaga, Juanita Santos. My mom is listening. She's very proud I'm here with Atty. Kapunan and with you.
Hi, Mami.
Magandang umaga po.
Siguro kasing ganda nyo at kasing gwapo kayo na anak ninyo. Anyway, thank you, Katerina. Please, for everybody's information, what exactly is the International Committee on the Red Cross? Because our listeners and viewers are really just familiar with the Philippine Red Cross. What is the relationship of your ICRC committee to the Philippine Red Cross?
Sure, thank you. So the International Committee of the Red Cross, or short ICRC, we are an independent, neutral and impartial organization. We were actually founded in 1863, so a very long time ago. And we were at the beginning, and we were sort of the founding institution of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. Now, ever since the beginning, our mandate has been to assist and protect victims of armed conflict or wars, as we can say, and also armed violence. And that has not changed in all these years. Since the beginning, since we were, founded in 1863, the movement has grown very rapidly. And now, in addition to the International Committee of the Red Cross, which works exclusively in those situations of armed conflict and armed violence, there are also...
Maybe just, Katerina, just a little bit of historical background. No?
Sure, yes.
Yes, 1863.
Yes.
I don't think you and I were born then. Neither have our listeners or viewers. What was it that prompted a committee or an organization like the ICRC, which I think is really an offshoot of the International Red Cross?
Yes, it's...
Could you explain the relationship
I'm glad
between
you're asking that question. It's
the Red Cross and International Red Cross, which is headquartered in Geneva, and your committee?
Yes, so let me start with a bit of history since you asked, and it's a very interesting history. So actually 6 years before our foundation or creation, in 1857, there was a very large battle, the Battle of Solferino, which involved, and it's hard to imagine nowadays, it involved over 230,000 soldiers between the French, Sardinian, or today Italian soldiers, and the Austrian Empire.
This was
1857, the Battle of Solferino.
Was this the First World War, the Second World War?
No, it was even before. It was long before. Yes.
And
it was,
what did they fight about?
So they fought, as always, about territory. So
That's what I figured.
Yes, and it was a very, very large battle. It was actually one of the largest.
Solferino is in...
It's now Italy.
Correct.
Yes, what is now Italy. Now, at the end of this battle in 1857, a Swiss businessman by the name of Henri Dunant,
I like the sound of that. Can you repeat? We always say in the Red Cross, Henri Dunant. Can you pronounce it again?
Henri Dunant.
Henri Dunant na tayo ngayon. Hindi na Henri Dunant. Yes, please. So he was a Swiss businessman, and
that's right. He
saw the suffering on the field.
And he was passing by. He was a Swiss businessman from Geneva. He was passing by, and it was the end of the battle. And it's hard to imagine, but he passed by this battlefield. And by the way, this battlefield still exists, and it can be visited today. But basically, he passed by and he saw the suffering, because there was not only were there over 20,000 dead soldiers, but there were also
from both sides.
But they were also...
So this was between the French.
Italian, what's now Italy, Sardinia was the at
Is
the
this
time.
where sardines come from? No,
That is a question I cannot
just to
answer.
make light of this discussion. So Sardinia was the territory
Yes, and they won over the Austria.
they-
Yes,
yeah, okay.
so you may have heard about
Yes.
the Habsburgs, the Austrian
Oh, yes.
Empire.
you see it in Netflix.
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
They should actually have a Netflix show
They
about
should
this
have,
battle,
actually,
maybe.
yeah.
Or the story of Henri Dunant. Maybe we can suggest that.
So he saw all of these
So he
people
also saw the
dying,
suffering, and
suffering,
they're
dead.
dying because they were not being attended to. So there was no one looking after the wounded and sick on this battlefield, and there were thousands of them who were still alive and just suffering.
On both sides.
Well, yes, and it was just there was no provisions for it. There was no, and as you can imagine, in a war,
You don't cross enemy lines in a war.
That's right.
You get
And-
shot or
and
killed.
nowadays we have that idea, and I think it's very known nowadays that no matter from which side you are, you should be assisted if you are wounded or sick, and that is a very basic concept that Henri Dunant actually. You could say founded or then promoted the idea that if there are wounded and sick who are no longer participating in hostilities, they should be protected and helped and assisted.
Okay.
And so with that
We
idea,
will go to that because that would be the 4 Geneva Conventions.
It
and
would be, yes,
protocols.
exactly. The 4 Geneva Conventions and really the basis, the essence of international humanitarian law.
So Henry Dunant, the Swiss businessman, sees all of this after
After the battle.
and
And he decides that he wants to do something about it. So he went back to Geneva and he started talking he was quite influential in the business world. And mind you, there was no such idea, no such concept of, the humanitarian sector that we have now. So he managed to convince other influential people that something needed to be done. And that's when this committee was founded. So that's the origins of the International Committee of the Red Cross. And the idea was really to have an independent organization, a committee or an organization that doesn't take sides, that doesn't say these are the right, these are the winners
will
and the
save you,
losers,
yeah,
or
we'll save
the
you
good and
because-
the bad ones.
We will save you because we like your country.
Exactly, but it was much
we
more...
belong to your country.
That's
now.
right. It was really just about saying these people are dying and we need to help them. And so that was sort of the essence of international humanitarian law. And
how
from
did it
that-
evolve into a federation of Red Cross worldwide?
So what's really interesting and what I find really fascinating is that, these concepts of international humanitarian law, and the word humanitarian already says it is law, but it's very basic human concepts. It's the idea that you help those in need and that those who are not participating in the fighting should be protected. And so because these concepts were so, let's say,
Basic,
logical
yeah.
and basic, they caught on and people were convinced that, and so slowly but surely states started to sign up to the idea that it was a good idea to have these rules that apply in war. So the idea that you accept that sometimes there has to be fighting and armed conflict, and this is also very basic in international humanitarian law. So it's not that you cannot fight. So fighting is allowed, but only between those who actually participate. And those who don't participate, which is first and foremost civilians, women, children, but also soldiers who are sick or wounded or detained. And all these people
Who are no longer in active warfare.
That's right. And all of those need to be protected. And why did so many states sign, and nowadays armed groups sign on to this idea? Is because it's the idea that if we do this, we're hoping that the other side will do it too. And so it's that idea that I want my soldiers to be protected, my fighters. And so it's sort of that human element again. So having humanity in the times of war was sort of the basic concept.
Well,
Now-
war really lets us forget our humanity.
That's
because
right.
It's a kill or be killed mentality.
That's right, but I guess what the International Committee of the Red Cross and also the different Red Crescent and Red Cross societies are trying to do is to say let's try and find a little bit of humanity in that situation. And you asked, how did it evolve into this big movement? So what was found, initially there was this committee in Geneva that was basically responsible for, you can say,
all this rich
conflicts.
businessman who wanted to
do
help.
something, yes. But slowly but surely, as this movement grew, it became apparent that there was a need to have an organization a little bit on a more, on national levels. And so slowly but surely, different national societies developed, and these national societies, which is, for example, the Philippine Red Cross, but they exist in over 190 countries in the world, they were set up to work not only in times of war but also in times of peace. So that is one of the big differences between the International Committee of the Red Cross and these national societies, is that their functions have become much broader. So whilst they don't stop working in times of armed conflict, as we are seeing here in the Philippines, the Philippine Red Cross is very active in the different non-international armed conflicts that exist here in the country.
So this concept of humanitarian law, it didn't become a law then. No? How did it become what we now commonly refer to as the Geneva Conventions? Because I ask because we have a Philippine Constitution that says that the Philippines respects international treaties, and one such treaty are the Geneva Conventions. So, what are these Geneva Conventions?
So the Geneva Conventions, there was actually a first Geneva Convention that was sort of the predecessor to the four conventions that we have now. That was 1864. But after that first convention, why are treaties called conventions? It's because they are normally drafted
in a
during
convention.
That's right. So
Ay, ganun pala, Manny. Kanya convention ang tawag doon kasi talagang nagko-convene at may convention.
That's right.
Okay.
So you convene to come up with a convention or a treaty. So there was that initial convention, and then after the Second World War, so a few years after the Second World War, in 1949, the world states, and it must be said, it wasn't just the big powers, but it was really the community of states at the time decided that there needed to be a body of laws that really codify, as we say, or that puts in writing all these rules that had already developed. A lot of them had already developed.
It's like
during
customary.
The World Wars.
It's like
exactly. So there was these rules,
developed
for
by
example,
custom?
Yes. So, for example, not killing a civilian, protecting soldiers that were wounded. These rules had already been respected to a certain extent during the World Wars. But it was found that there was so much suffering during these two World Wars that it was worth coming up with this body of laws, and that states agreed, we want to create these rules that are respected by all of us, so that wars in the future can be more humane. And so these.
Why was it necessary for something like this? And how did you distinguish this Federation of Red Cross? And later you will explain why there is a Red Crescent. And Red Crystal, okay. But why was it necessary when there was a League of Nations, which became United Nations, which we have now?
So, it's a very good question. The League of Nations, or the United Nations, is really what I would call the community of states. So there's representatives of governments who come together to draft treaties, to decide on political matters, and this is a very important forum, obviously, to bring everyone together and discuss. The big difference with the Red Cross, and especially the International Committee Red Cross, but the entire movement, is that it's apolitical. So there's no political.
That's a very
discussions to be
important
had.
point,
Yes.
especially for our listeners.
Yes.
Ang International Red Cross at saka International ICRC, International Committee of the Red Cross, and the Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent and Red Crystal Societies, hindi po political yan. So, pati po ang Philippine Red Cross, although ang ating chairman ay isang senador, hindi po political ang Philippine Red Cross. At sana kung may perception na ito ay political, itong talakayan natin ngayong umaga ay magka-clarify sa concept na yan. So, the Federation is apolitical.
Yes, and let me just add, this is really important for our work, and this includes not just the work of the ICRC, but also of the Filipino Red Cross, but also the larger movement. Why is this so important? It's important for two reasons: for access, and also for, well, access and perception, which is very, very much linked. Because the mandate of the Red Cross movement, or the reason for existing, is really to help those in need, irrespective of their political affiliations, their religious affiliations, whether they're the good guys or the bad guys, as you would commonly perceive them. But it's really about needs. It's who needs assistance in situations, whether it's
regardless of the flag that they fly,
absolutely,
regardless of their political beliefs. Manny, maybe now is the time for you to recite what are the fundamental principles of the Red Cross.
Ang fundamental principles of the Red Cross is the basis of our actions. It's humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence, voluntary service, universality, and unity. And these are the principles that binds the movement.
Okay, paki-explain. Napakabilis naman. Hindi narinig ng nanay mo yun. Okay. The 7 principles, the whole International Federation of the Red Cross, and the 100, are they 190 now? National societies worldwide?
Yes, ma'am.
Before we go into explanation of what are the fundamental principles that the societies stand for, why do you mention a red crescent, and how did this evolve? And just to add to the confusion, there also is a red crystal. Maybe you would want to share the difference.
Sure. Yes, and this is also a little bit of history, maybe, which I'm sure you know, but some of the listeners may not. The Red Cross, it's often believed to be a religious symbol, but it is not, and that is also very important, because what I just mentioned, not only is the movement apolitical, but it is also not religious in any way.
So the cross is not a sign of Christianity.
It is not. It was the common understanding.
Why did we use it?
So it goes back to our friend Henri Dunant, the founder of the International Committee of the Red Cross, and being Swiss, and having founded the ICRC in Switzerland, it is believed that he chose the Red Cross as an inversion of the Swiss flag, which is the white cross. Is the white cross on the red background.
Yes.
So
the
it's
Swiss flag is the white cross on the red background.
That's right.
So he did the reverse.
That's right.
It's very clever.
But at the same time, you could say if he did it today, he probably wouldn't have chosen that, because it is perceived to be religious, and it's been very hard for us, and it's a constant
it takes a lot of
effort
explanation.
Exactly. Now, even though it was not intended to be religious, it was perceived as a symbol of Christianity, and so the Ottoman Empire, or what is nowadays Turkey, they decided to come up with a red crescent. So that became sort of the second symbol that was accepted. The reason why I mentioned the history is because really it shouldn't have been necessary to have the second symbol, given that the Red Cross was not religious. But to avoid any anger or upset, it was decided, to have the Red Crescent as a second symbol. There was actually
the Red Crescent is the moon, no?
Yes, the half moon.
I think this is symbolic of our brother Muslim.
That's right. It's it's meant to be, or it's nowadays used by like Muslim countries, although not all of, it's not that if you're a predominantly Muslim country, you have to adopt the Red Crescent. It's really free to any of the national societies to choose.
Meron, ma'am. There is a country that uses a Red Cross, but they are predominantly Muslim.
Which
Indonesia.
Yeah, Indonesia.
Yeah.
And also, there was a red lion and sun at one point, but it's and that's mentioned in the Geneva Conventions, but that is now not used by any country anymore. And as you mentioned, the red crystal is actually a very recent third symbol that was added by the third additional protocol to the conventions. And this red crystal is really meant to provide the possibility of, given that both the Red Crescent and the Red Cross have religious, let's say, people have associations with religion. Yeah, it's perceived as religious, even though it shouldn't be. So the red crystal was invented, if you want to call it like that, to really allow national societies to have this symbol that is completely without any religious connotation. And so this red crystal can be used as a third symbol.
As a third symbol. Actually, I had the honor of being part of that convention, that delegation, that meeting that approved the red crystal symbol. And everybody was missing their flights. We had to go home. That's why I remember. Everybody had to go home, but we had to stay until early morning and to keep us all engaged and waiting for the decision of the states and state actors. They put on the World Cup soccer game. So nobody left. Nobody left. I mean, that is a trivia that I will never forget. So there are now 3 symbols, mga nakikinig. 3 na po ang symbol ng Red Cross, ng mga societies ng Red Cross Federation. Ito po yung Red Cross na ginagamit natin dito sa Pilipinas. Meron rin red crescent, parang crescent moon yun, ginagamit sa mga Muslim national societies. At merong pangatlo, red crystal. Yung red crystal, parang pressure na galing yun sa Israel, no? Kasi sabi ng Israel, hindi naman sila Catholic, hindi naman sila Christian, because to them, the Christ Jesus has not yet come. Hindi naman sila Muslim, so there must be a symbol that cannot be connotated. But that is history. So, we now have, what is the importance of this? Why is it necessary to have all of these symbols?
Another good question. So the idea of the red, of having a symbol and of the Red Cross was really to have a symbol that is recognized by everyone in a situation of armed conflict as the symbol, as a protective sign, so to speak. So to make sure that when they're carrying this symbol or this emblem, they cannot be attacked. So that was the idea for in a situation of armed conflict.
Also to make it clear that you're not a participant of the conflict. Now, this conflict, is this just international? I mean, are we talking, because you mentioned the Battle of Solferino, then the World Wars and all that. Is the conflict, must the conflict be international?
No. Well, initially, yes. So the Geneva Conventions, when they were initially conceived, the conflicts that were on the states' minds were all international armed conflicts. So the Geneva Conventions, for the large majority, contain rules that apply in international armed conflicts. There is common Article 3, however, so there's an article that's common to all 4 conventions, and that also covers situations of non-international armed conflict, which has become very, very important nowadays. And then there's the 2 additional protocols that were adopted at a later stage, but these 2 additional protocols, one of them exclusively deals with non-international armed conflicts. And I should also mention at this point that there is, and you referred to it previously, there is what we call customary international humanitarian law. So it's the customs that have developed through the practice of the warring parties. So through the practice and the respect that was shown for these rules, it is now accepted that these rules apply even to states that have not ratified a certain treaty. So customary international law, and especially customary international humanitarian law, is very important because it applies across the board. So it applies to everyone.
So just before we go into a station break, just to summarize, the first Geneva Convention relates to...
Yes, the wounded and sick.
The wounded and sick in the battlefield.
That's right. The second one is to the wounded and sick, the shipwrecked, so in a naval war situation.
Because the armed conflict, international armed conflict, extended to the seas.
That's right.
So we had to have a second Geneva Convention to protect the wounded and sick.
The third
in the seas. Okay.
That's right. The third one is about prisoners of war or detainees, if you want to call
Geneva
them that.
Convention number 3 is about prisoners of war. Pag down na, tsaka prisoner of war na, wag mo nang papatayan.
Yeah, they should be respected.
So,
yeah.
but that was not happening, so we needed a third Geneva Convention.
Yes, and that is a very important convention, and it's important, really, the idea that what we mentioned before, that when persons are detained, even if they are part of the enemy, they're enemy soldiers, so to speak, or enemy fighters, once they're no longer constituting a threat to you because they're in your power, you should protect them. So they're in a vulnerable
They cannot
state.
be tortured. They cannot be.
They need to be given food, medicine, access
As
to.
would you give your own countrymen?
That is right.
Okay.
And-
The fourth Geneva
And the fourth
Convention.
Geneva Convention is about civilians.
About
protection of
civilians.
That's
Okay.
right, yes.
Yun.
Maidagdag ko lang, ma'am.
Yes.
Bago tayo mag-break. Yung emblems is a neutral emblems. All the emblems have the same equal status and they provide equal protection to those in need. So, wala po siyang religion, wala siyang religious connotation. So, hindi porket krus, pang Christian or pang crescent, pang Muslim or pang crystal or for whatever. So, yun po yun, ma'am. Para mas malinaw sa ating mga kababayan, tinagalog ko lang po. Thank you.
Okay. And as was mentioned by Katerina, these are protective symbols. And this not only applies to uniforms, no?
No, it's transport. So medical transport.
So they apply to vehicles,
That are
ambulances,
exclusively used for medical.
for medical,
transport, yes.
or for
And
rescue, or for
yes, rescue and assistance. It should also be mentioned that in addition to just being protective, they're also used by the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement for identification purposes.
Yes.
So,
So
that
it
is
is-
the second use
Yeah.
of the emblem.
Yun yung
So,
indicative, ma'am.
Yeah, yung indicative.
use. Yes.
Ang ibig sabihin ng indicative, nakalagay sa suot mo, yung logo ng cross or yung logo ng Red Crescent para ma-identify ka as a volunteer for this humanitarian organization. Ang problema man niya, pag-uusapan natin after the commercial ID, paano yung mga butika? Yung mga nakikita natin dyan, yung mga security guard na may cross, yung mga medical, mga doktor na pag nagbigay ng ID nila, merong cross, no? Pag-uusapan natin yan after this station ID.
Laban para sa karapatan. Kasama si Atty. Lorna Kapunan.
Patuloy na naglilingkod sa bayan. Mas todong pagbabalita. Mas todong pagseserbisyo publiko. Ito ang DWIZ 882. Mas todong lakas. Mas pinakikinggan ng buong bansa. DWIZ 882. Maririnig saan man panig ng daigdig. Mag-livestream lamang sa www.dwiz882am.com o i-download ang official DWIZ 882 app sa Apple Store at sa Google Play Store. DWIZ 882. Mapapakinggan worldwide.
Sinusuyod ng buong pwersa ng DWIC News at Public Affairs ang buong Kamaynilaan.
Upang mayatid ang mga latest na kaganapan.
Mga balitang dapat ninyong malaman.
Ito ang DWIZ Balita.
Mas todong pagbabalita.
DWIZ Balita.
Tiniyak ng AFP o Armed Forces of the Philippines na ligtas nilang mapalalaya sa kamay ng mga bandidong Abu Sayyaf ang 3 bihag nito. Iyan ang inihayag ni AFP Public Affairs Chief Colonel Noel De Toyato sa kabila na banta ng ASG na pupugutan nila ang kanilang mga bihag na kinabibilangan ng isang Malaysian at 2 Indonesian na pawang mga mangingisda. Iginit ni De Toyato ang paninindigan ng AFP na walang negosasyon at wala ring pagbabayad ng ransom sa mga bandido dahil paiigtingin pa nilang opensiba para tugisin ng mga ito. Magugunit ang dinukot ng mga bandido ang mga dayuhang mangingisda habang nagsasagawa ang mga ito ng fishing expedition sa silangang baybayin ng Sabah na nasasakupan naman ng Pilipinas. Para sa karagdagang impormasyon at mas marami pang mga balita, bisitahin kami sa aming website, dwiz882am.com at sundan ng aming Twitter account at Facebook page, dwiz882. Ako po, si Krista De Dios.
Balitang pakipakinabang sa mga mamamayan. Inyong nalaman sa DWIZ Balita.
Maging updated sa mga balita.
Mas todong pagbabalita. DWIZ Balita.
You never know what's around the bend to help you through. You need a friend, but we can guarantee service ideas, innovations, a reliable fortune for many generations. For real, for all time, fortune. More than a friend, fortune general, worth hanging on to. Fortune, friend from beginning to end. Fortune General.
Fortune General Insurance Corporation, serving you for over 50 years.
Abangan ang programang Laban para sa Karapatan kasama si Atty. Lorna Kapunan. Programang magliliwanag ng mga usaping legal at mga payo tungkol sa inyong karapatan. Tandaan ang programang Laban para sa Karapatan. Sabado, alas 11 hanggang alas 12 ng tanghali kasama si Atty. Lorna Kapunan. Laban para sa Karapatan. Laban para sa Karapatan. Kasama si Atty. Lorna Kapunan.
Nandito na naman po tayo sa programang Laban para sa Karapatan. At ngayong araw na to ay we are very honored to have with us Miss Caterina Capos. Siya po ay operational legal advisor ng ating International Committee of the Red Cross. Before we go into what is the ICRC, International Committee, doing in this country, I will ask first Manny.
Yes.
Manny, anong ginagawa natin? Maraming butika, maraming security agencies, maraming na gumagamit. Hindi lang yun, di ba? Kung minsan nagja-jogging, nagfa-fun run ang Red Cross, nagbibigay tayo ng mga t-shirt na may Red Cross. Ginagamit. Minsan may nakita nga ako nagbibenta ng ng sampagita naka Red Cross t-shirt kasi pinamigay natin nung nagmarathon tayo. Anong ginagawa ng Philippine Red Cross?
Ma'am, ang pangunahing ginawa ng Philippine Red Cross is nag-legislate or tumulong mag-legislate ng batas. Tinulungan natin ng gobyerno na pasa ng batas para ipagbawal yung...
So, bawal ngayon?
Opo. Meron po tayong batas na noon pa naman meron na kasi sa charter ng Philippine Red Cross nakalagay na bawal ang Red Cross pero it does not mention Red Crescent and Red Crystal. That's why we enacted another law, Republic Act 10530, na magbabawal na hindi ka authorized gumamit or maglagay ng Red Cross, Red Crescent, Red Crystal or the words and translation.
Paano yung mga doktor na ang card nila may cross?
Yes,
ganyan,
ma'am.
to indicate that they are practicing,
Opo.
bawal na rin yan.
Opo. Bawal po yun kasi kagaya po ng sinabi ni Caterina that the Red Cross can only be used by personnel of the Red Cross and for protective purposes or people that are in people that are in conflict situations that should be protected. Plus yung in peacetime,
military natin. Yung military natin kasi ang Red Cross civilian organization tayo,
Yes,
no?
ma'am. Opo.
Sa matter of fact, ang description sa atin is auxiliary tayo.
Yes.
Hindi po tayo gobyerno. Sa mga nakikinig, ang Red Cross hindi po gobyerno. And ang tinutulungan natin ay ang gobyerno.
Opo. Because we are auxiliary, we help in the things that the government is in need, like lacking sila sa halimbawa for example ngayon measles, 'di ba, tumutulong ang Red Cross nag-vaccinate na. So
naging guest ko nga ang ating very busy ngayon, no, former Undersecretary of Health, si Susie Pineda Mercado.
Opo.
Dito at pinag-usapan ang ginagawa ng Red Cross. Nung kulang ang mga public hospitals, nagtayo tayo ng mga tents, no?
Yes.
Para lang sa measles outbreak niyan. So, ang Red Cross, ang common perception ng mga kababayan natin, Red Cross pang-donate ng dugo. Kasi medyo naging icon natin si Tita Rosa Rosal, no? So, pag nakikita nila si Red Cross, Rosa Rosal yan, magbibigay tayo ng dugo. Kung minsan naman, hindi lang dugo, nakikita nila emergency. Kasi lalo na ngayon, nag-training tayo ng earthquake, pumupunta tayo sa mga disasters and all that. Gaano kahalaga sa atin ang humanitarian law naman?
Yes, ma'am. Importante po ang international humanitarian law kasi po ang mga parties to the conflict mas maintindihan nila na kapag may suot-suot na krus na pula, you cannot harm.
Huwag mo naman barilin.
Oo, hindi
kasi
siya
tutulungan ka.
They should be protected in times of armed conflict. Kaya nga meron silang Red Cross symbol or emblem para they can be identified as people who are supposed to help in times of armed conflict. Pag na-harm sila, hindi, sino pa ang tutulong? So, yeah. Kaya po tinatawag na neutral impartial tayo. And the symbols itself.
Let me shift a little, no? The protection, Katrina, is not only to people, no? I think we had a very viral video online where we saw our Muslim brothers devastate churches in Mindanao and desecrate saints, statues of saints. Are these protected by international humanitarian law? Buildings, not only churches, hospitals, which are not part of this battle.
Yes, Attorney Kapunan, I'm glad you're raising this point. It's a very important one. On the one hand, you're absolutely right that it's not only persons that are protected and what we call civilians, civilian persons, but also civilian objects.
Civilian objects.
And civilian
what are
objects
civilian objects?
Is basically any building or facility or object, it could be a car, for example, that is not used for military purposes. So if it's not a military objective, it is by default considered a civilian object. So anything that's not used for military purpose. Now, I want to add to that, and this is very important and also current, there is also specific protections that exist for what we call cultural heritage or cultural property.
Yes, okay.
Protection of cultural property is very important, and that's what you mentioned, whether it's buildings or symbols of religious connotation, but it's anything that is considered cultural heritage of a particular context. It can be
Would these buildings also have the protective sign?
So they would not have the protective sign, but they would be. So it's also a really important question you raise. Not in an armed conflict. It's not that the armed fighters can attack anything that doesn't have the protective symbol. This is very important. As a matter of fact, it's the responsibility of the fighting forces to identify which ones are the military and which ones are the civilian objectives. So it's not that they can attack anything that doesn't have the Red Cross or a Red Crescent on it, but they have to conduct intelligence to ascertain whether a certain objective, a certain building, car, person is considered military in its purpose and can be attacked, and that is very important. But I wanted to mention the cultural property in particular because I think, and you particular as an attorney would be interested also, and we all know the Philippines have very progressive laws and legislation with regard to international humanitarian law. But one thing that the ICRC always does in all the countries, over 90 countries that we work, is to promote treaties and legislation. And one of the conventions that hasn't been ratified by the Philippines is the Hague Convention, 1954 Hague Convention on cultural property, on the protection of cultural property. So that is one of the conventions that, especially in the Philippines, where there's a lot of cultural heritage, this convention
that is true.
Has importance.
We have so much cultural heritage. We had 300 years under the Spanish, and over 5 decades under the Americans, and we have our own indigenous as well, and we just see them, as a matter of fact, we just see them being destroyed, sadly. And let me shift here a little. Sadly, not only in war, but stupid politicians who tear down historical buildings in favor of condominium units. So that is very important. The Hague Convention
It's 1954.
of 1954, mga senador dyan, gawin nyo naman ang homework, nakakahiya tayo sa federation. What else are pending with our Philippine Senate? Just so the public understands, treaties are a function of the Senate. It is the Senate, not the lower house. It is the Senate that, under our Philippine Constitution, has the responsibility of legislating or ratifying our treaties. What would be the pending treaties? So this Hague Convention on Cultural Properties.
That's right, and there are many, but I think the ones that the ICRC and together with the Philippine Red Cross we are sort of focusing on, because we believe that they are very important also to the Philippine context and worldwide, is the what we call the IDP bill. IDP stands for Internally Displaced Persons,
Okay.
and that, as you certainly know and our listeners know, is a very current and important topic in the
Yes, because going back to what is more relevant perhaps to our listeners is what is going on in Mindanao. We just had the ISIS there, and we were there. No? What provinces were involved in this, Manny?
Marawi, ma'am.
In Marawi, and we had so many displaced persons that had to seek shelter and evacuate. Would this be your internally displaced persons?
That's correct. So internally displaced persons are basically persons who are forced to leave, whether it's through an order or whether it's because of the situation on the ground, and they are displaced internally. So they don't leave cross international borders, but they are displaced internally inside a country. And
this could be because of conflict?
conflict.
What about disaster?
That's right. So the bill that's currently being discussed and that we are hoping will be passed soon also includes persons displaced for other reasons. So natural disasters, and I'm sure Nani can mention organized violence. So there can be violence that doesn't amount to an armed conflict. So there's different categories and different reasons why persons are forced to flee their homes. But basically, and I'm sure many of our listeners know this also from the Marawi crisis and its aftermath, what happens if people are forced to flee? Some of them might have relatives in other parts of the country where they can go, but others are just left to themselves. And so it's this bill really, the idea is to provide protection to them and to assist them in the situation, but also then provide compensation to help them rebuild their lives, help them to return when the situation
Why does the ICRC think that this is necessary when that really should be the function of government and the state?
Absolutely, and we are not getting in. Well, so I should say the ICRC, in situations of armed conflict, when persons are displaced, we are often the first ones to respond in areas where maybe the government cannot reach because of armed conflict, or
because they're not allowed to reach the area because of insurgency or soldiers for the other side.
That's right. In some situations, in other contexts, not necessarily Philippines, you can also have situations where the government doesn't have the means to provide assistance. Sometimes the government breaks down. There is no government anymore, and in those situations, those people are left to themselves. So to us, it's
what is your presence, Katarina? What is your presence now, ICRC in the Philippines?
Yes, so
specifically in areas where there is armed conflict.
That's absolutely correct. So with the ICRC, we always try to be as close as possible to those in need and to the situations of armed conflict. Now we have our main delegation here in Manila. This is always the case. Usually that we have an office in the capital city, and this is more for the dialogue with the different authorities and a general sort of setup. But then we have different offices in the places where we are most needed. And in the Philippines, that's in Mindanao. So we have different offices in Mindanao. Our sub-delegation is based in Davao, and then we have offices in Cotabato, Iligan, and Zamboanga.
What do you do in these offices?
So in these
You
offices,
actually go out to the field, or can for instance, can displaced persons go to your office and say, I'm displaced? Or can the family of a missing person go to you and say, please look for my family, or please look for my husband or my son? The last we saw him, he was fighting in Marawi.
absolutely. What we do, and this is worldwide and in the Philippines, our work, it's got sort of two main components, which is what we call protect and assist. So the protection is through the dialogue that we have, and the dialogue we talk to. We always say we talk to everyone, but we talk. Sorry, am I too far from the microphone? Yeah. We talk to authorities and government, armed forces, police, legislators, but we also talk to non-state armed groups. And through that dialogue, we try to improve the protection of the civilians. And so our presence in the field is also to be closer to those who are fighting in those areas. So that's the protection element. Then what we also do is we assist, and we've mentioned the internally displaced persons, but we try to assist people who are affected by the armed conflict in situations, after, in the aftermath of Marawi, someone who's been injured during fighting, the detainees. We visit prisons, so we visit detention facilities.
Are you also part of the rescue or rehabilitation efforts in these areas?
Yes. So you mean in Marawi?
Generally.
So we are an organization that really, we sort of, let's say we react in situations of armed conflict, so that's very important. And we do assist in rehabilitation, but we try not to substitute. So where the government or other organizations are able to help, we will not also interfere, so to speak. But in the aftermath of Marawi, for example, we are involved in assisting the authorities with reestablishing their water network. We're training health personnel in how to assist better all those who were wounded or sick. We're also having programs of training programs with different institutions, not only about IHL, but we have engineers, as I said, who are working on issues related to
now that you mention education and educating various sectors, government, the academe as well, and judges, maybe we should go back to the basic of the confusion between human rights and international humanitarian law. Iba po sa mga nakikinig po, iba po yung human rights, iba po yung humanitarian law. Tanungin natin kay Katrina, what is the difference between human rights and humanitarian law?
Yes, and it is a very confusing terminology because it sounds very similar. Human rights and humanitarian law. They both protect humans, hence the humanitarian and human rights. The big difference is that human rights law applies in times of armed conflict, so in times of war and in times of peace, whereas humanitarian law only applies in times of armed conflict.
Okay.
So that's a big distinction. It's a bit similar, by the way, to Red Cross and International Committee of the Red Cross, because the International Committee of the Red Cross works in situations of armed conflict, and the Red Cross works in both situations of armed conflict and times of peace. But
so human rights only applies to, human rights applies both to times of war, times of conflict, and times of peace.
Yes.
Humanitarian law applies only to times of conflict.
That's correct.
So I beat up my wife. human rights.
That's correct. If you beat up your wife, well, it's interesting because human rights law traditionally is an obligation or responsibility of the state, of the government.
Correct.
So it's the government that is meant to protect the human rights of all those under its power, so to speak. So it's the obligation to not only respect the rights, but also protect in the sense that ensure that no one else violates those rights.
But there is what's this? There is a connection, no?
Absolutely. And I should say that
There's an overlap, is what I meant to say.
Yes, and
between human rights and humanitarian
there's an
rights.
overlap and there's some important distinctions. Now, the big distinction, and that's the first one that's usually mentioned, is that human rights law, one of the very basic and what we call non-derogable, so the rights that cannot be limited, is the right to life. So that
Yes.
no one shall be deprived of their life, i.e. killed. Whereas in an international, under international humanitarian law, in a situation of an armed conflict, it is actually permitted that one fighter or soldier kills another. So that is not prohibited under international humanitarian law. It is prohibited to kill civilians, kill the wounded, sick, detained. That is prohibited, but that is one of the biggest distinctions. But if you are a soldier, you can kill the enemy fighter in a situation of armed conflict.
And this is not only with international conflict where there are two states fighting. This also relates to non-international armed conflict, like not only the war in Mindanao, but our insurgents, those who want to overthrow the government. You're saying that the government or government forces and vice versa, the insurgents, in that situation, there is no violation of human rights if they start shooting each other?
So this is a very good question, because human rights law, as I said, applies in times of war and peace, but it is overridden, or it is we have to look at international humanitarian law if it's a situation of armed conflict. So if we're looking at a situation where two armed groups or a government army and an armed group are fighting each other, then international humanitarian law will say, yes, they can kill each other, even though human rights law would say, if you kill, as you mentioned, if you kill your neighbor in that situation of armed conflict, and you are both civilians, then that is not prohibited. That's not permitted. So that's very important. It's not just because there's an armed conflict, everyone can kill each
There
other.
also is a Ten Commandments that says that shall not, regardless of the law.
As the ICRC, we want
There is the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill. Correct?
That's correct. But more importantly, looking at and this is where it becomes sometimes tricky, but you have a situation like in Mindanao where there are armed conflicts going on, but then you can have a situation where, let's say, police are, engaged in an operation that is not linked to an armed conflict.
For instance, you've heard about the drug war here, no?
That is
where one of the primary concerns of government is to address the situation of increasing drug problem and the millions of people, especially our youth, affected by it. The concern here is so many extrajudicial killings. That would be human rights, not humanitarian law.
You're absolutely correct, and there it is important that law enforcement officers, so police involved in those situations, they respect the provisions of human rights law. And human rights law, as I mentioned, does not prohibits or protects the right to life, but there are situations where people can be killed, in a situation where it's self-defense, for example, or where it's absolute necessity. But that's we don't want to enter now into the details because it is quite complex. But human rights law basically protects the right to life and has strict rules on how that should be implemented. And similarly, there's the right to not to be tortured, for example. That is protected both in times of war and times of peace. So international humanitarian law prohibits torture or ill treatment of detainees, but that same right is also
principally
protected
the
by
difference
human
is humanitarian law is only during times of conflict, whether international or non-international, and human rights pwede po yan, but whether may conflict or wala. Your last words? We're running out of time.
Thank you very much for inviting us, Ma'am Lorna. Happy birthday pa kagabi, happy belated happy birthday.
Okay. Happy birthday, tatay ni Manny.
Opo,
And
maraming
please, when are we celebrating IHL month?
IHL month is
Here in the
this
Philippines?
coming August, August 12, exactly August 12, IHL Day.
Okay, so let us not wait for August 12
Yes.
to respect humanitarian law and humanitarian rights. Katerina, welcome to Manila.
Thank you so much. Last words, yes, you mentioned the IHL month, and I should also mention this year it marks the 70th anniversary of the Geneva Convention. So it's 70 years since they were adopted in 1949. So it's a big year for us, for the Red Cross movement, Red Cross Red Crescent movement, ICRC, Filipino Red Cross, and there will be more events and things happening this year, and I think it'll be interesting for our listeners to be involved in that, and I'm sure you will be talking about that this year.
Very good. So maraming salamat, Manny, and thank you very much, Katerina. My question to you and to the listeners is 70 years of the Geneva Conventions and humanitarian law. Is this a better world to live in? Yun po ang tanong natin. Dito po tayo sa Laban para sa Karapatan, Atty. Lorna Patajo-Kapunan. Have a good weekend. Susunod na po si Ma'am Celi Ortega Bueno at si Sir Raul Esperas.
Sumayin nyo ang programang Laban para sa Karapatan hanggang sa Sabado, alas 11 hanggang alas 12 ng tanghali kasama si Atty. Lorna Kapunan. Laban para sa Karapatan sa DWIC.
Balita Nationwide ay sambayang napapakinggan sa mga sumusunod na himpilan ng RPN Radio Philippines Network. DZRL Batak, DZKI